Hi, everyone. My name is Guillermo Rogel, and I am the Legislative and Government Relations Advocate with Front and Center. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm going to go over some quick logistics before I give a full introduction into what we're doing today. So, to cover some basic housekeeping, the chat function is available, as well as the Q&A function. But first, for those that will need Spanish interpretation, you can click on the bottom left corner where it says interpretation to get real-time interpretation by our colleague Isabel. Isabel, do you want to repeat that?
Claro, hola, mucho gusto a todos, bienvenidos. Mi nombre es Isabel y yo estaré apoyando con la interpretación al español. Pueden utilizar en la barra de funciones de Zoom tanto el chat para escribir mensajes, sus preguntas a través del Q&A y van a poder ingresar al canal en español ahorita que James is going to activate that. Van a ver un globo en su barra de Zoom y pueden elegir la versión en español.
Thank you, Isabel. So again, the chat function is available. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So if you do have questions, feel free to utilize that function. And if you also need captions, there is a show captions option on the bottom left side of your Zoom screen as well. So just gonna let folks know that for interpretation and for folks that have asked us to speak a little bit slowly, we will be doing that. So if you do all have feedback for us in real time, feel free to put it into the chat or maybe in the question and A function if you don't want everyone to see it, and we could adapt the way that we're speaking. And again, thanks everyone for joining. Again, my name is Guillermo Rogel, and I'm the Legislative Advocate with Front and Center. I am coming to you here from my living room, and I am wearing a white shirt with glasses. I am Latino. If you all are curious, I am 5'8". Behind me is a picture of our coalition. So the Front and Center coalition is made up of 70 different organizations across Washington state that all advocate on different issues, whether that be farm workers and labor rights, folks that are welcoming immigrants and refugees, food sovereignty organizations. They all make up our organization and our coalition. And behind me is a group picture that we all took at Central Washington University, right outside the library at I believe I don't know what kind of cat or cougar their mascot is, but we are all surrounded by it. And it's a good group of us there in Ellensburg. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Again, here are just some live transcription Spanish audio options. So here is the agenda slide. We will be covering 6 different topics today. We're going to be diving into the 2024 legislative session, providing a little bit of context for what to expect. Then we'll be diving into our top priority, which is the Cumulative Risk Burden of Pollution Act, followed by our budget priorities, energy justice priorities, and then the question and answer. I see some folks in the chat. Feel free to welcome or introduce yourselves with your name and organization pronouns if you wish. On the right side are 3 photos. One from Utopia's annual luau. They have an annual performance that our staff attended, followed by 2 pictures from a community farm owned by farm workers up in Everson, Washington. It's called the Ejidos Community Project. And one photo is of a mural of folks picking different kinds of fruit and vegetables, kind of showcasing the life and hard work of farm workers in the fields that provide so much to not just Washington State, but to families across the nation under really hard conditions. And then at the bottom is a visit of some community members visiting the farm last year. Here are the 4 people that you will be hearing from today. 3 of them are front and center staff, and one of them is our community council member. So just as an introduction, you will be hearing from Nico Wedekind. He is our policy counsel. Welcome addition to our team over the last year, along with Devin Diaz, who is our policy coordinator, working on budget issues, tracking implementation of the HEAL Act, and the Environmental Justice Council. We also have Mario Thurisingham, who is our clean energy policy lead, and you'll be hearing energy justice priorities from her. And then Paulina Lopez, executive director at the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, and a member of the Front and Centered Community Council. So we have 4 photos of the folks here who are a part of the Front and Center team. So with that, I will hand it over to Paulina to give an overview of who Front and Centered is, how we do the work that we do, and why we're all gathered here a few days before the start of legislative session. So with that, Paulina, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Guillermo, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at the start kicking off of the 2024. As Guillermo said, I am Paulina Lopez, and I am the Executive Director of the Duwamish River Community Coalition, and I have served Front and Center Community Council for several years now. It has been a wonderful experience of learning together and collaborating with an organization that represents the work in the Duwamish Valley. So we are located on the Duwamish land and Coast Salish people here, and always we like to honor that as we do any work in respecting our land and our waters, protecting the Duwamish River, the only river in Seattle. If you're new to this space, Front and Center is a diverse and powerful coalition of communities of color-led groups across all Washington states, including my organization, the Duwamish River Community Coalition. Our missions and work have been coming together as the intersection of equity, environmental, and climate justice. And as we have been working together, as many of you advocates out there, we work towards a just transition away from a extraction-based economy. The one that's centered on ecological restoration, community resilience, social equity, and fuel of regenerative resources and cooperative work. Very governed by deep democracy and a culture of caring and sacredness. What we cannot accomplish all the work that we do all alone as a coalition member, we need to partner. And this has been a great way that we can come together and be proud to be an active leader on this organization. Sorry, I'm having a background. An active leader in this coalition because of how the frontline communities have been working together in a collaborative partner, making progress in our vision, mostly for just transition. So today we're going to be listening to what we have been planning all together. The RCC has been working very closely with Front and Center, but the priorities you will hear today also came out of the work of the coalition process, including our annual summit, which you can see in the back of the picture. For those who cannot visualize it, it's a picture of many of our coalition members together in the summit. But we also host weekly member working groups on specific issues at monthly policy assemblies for coalition members that would like to join and be updated on the work that we do. but they also comes together with all the values and our just transition principles. One of those is obviously a very important one of the self-determination and communities most impacted to co-govern, steward, and nourish communities rooted in place. And that has also mirrored the work that we do here for our organization. On the rights to everyone to a healthy environment by targeting those disparities that have been impacted for legacy of years. And then to stop the harm upon our communities and prevent false promises to invest and strengthen communities toward the purpose of ecological and community well-being. I hope that with all these priorities and all our values that we work with, we are able to understand how we are presenting today the curve. And now I'm going to share these priorities. I'm going to invite back Guillermo and the front and center team, who is going to let you know how we hope to see this progress on the legislator this year and how we can all contribute to make it real. Thank you, Guillermo.
Thank you, Paulina. So with that, I'm going to provide a little bit of context of what we're looking at this legislative session. So the title of this slide is Heading into the 2024 Legislative Session. For us, and for what we believe all legislators should do, is embed environmental justice with all climate-related policy. We work on energy policy, transportation, budget-related policy, and all of that really needs to go hand in hand with environmental justice. And for us, that's going to sit front and centered as we do our advocacy, not just this session, but all legislative sessions. We're heading into a short budget year, 60 days, otherwise known as a supplemental budget year, where the legislature will have to adjust the last year of the fiscal year, just with new revenue coming in, an understanding of the programs that they had allocated, knowing what they cost now. There will be some adjustments. And what we are looking for specifically is unanticipated climate revenue. The cap and trade program has generated more revenue than had been anticipated. 40% of that we need to go to overburdened and frontline communities. So what we're looking for, and what you'll hear Devin speak to later, is how we can hold the legislature accountable to the investments that they have already made, and then also make adjustments to any budget items that we know need to be clarified or adjusted in order to serve more community members that are facing the burden of climate change. There is also the Climate Commitment Act getting repealed, potentially. That's up for consideration in the legislature. There were signatures turned in to the Secretary of State to repeal this act. And now it's up to the legislature to decide what to do with it. My understanding is that the legislature is not going to take action, which means that the Climate Commitment Act, the repeal would go to the ballot. So this definitely will take up a lot of space and airtime this legislative session, so we can anticipate that. But we should know more as legislative session starts, and a better understanding of what legislators are thinking about in terms of responding to the repeal effort. Our focus is going to be continuing to focus on our community's health and a just transition, making sure that we know that we're moving Washington State away from fossil fuels to a cleaner, fairer, greener economy for Washington residents. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nico to talk about our new bill, House Bill 2070, which is our Cumulative Risk Burden of Pollution Act, introduced by Representative Charlotte Mena, which we are super excited to partner with her and see how far we can take this bill this legislative session. So Nico, I will turn it over to you, and just let me know when to click the next slide.
Sounds great. Thank you, Guillermo. Awesome. I think we can move on to the next slide. So part of Well, I mean, the entire point of this this bill, is to address the concept of cumulative burden. So what that means is the issue that a lot of communities have been facing is that many communities bear an unfair share of environmental harms across comparative to other communities across the state. Cumulative burden, what that means is it's looking at all the different conditions that exist in a community, such as air, water, soil pollution, other community characteristics that may worsen the health of a community, and compiling all of those into one sort of assessment rather than thinking about them all individually. So that's what a cumulative burden is, and with the goal of this bill is to try and address that issue. So I think we can advance to the next slide as well, Guillermo. There have been some attempts historically in the state to pass legislation surrounding cumulative environmental hazards or cumulative environmental burdens. I think a lot of you are familiar with the Environmental Health Disparities Map, which was required by the Clean Energy Transformation Act and further updated by HEAL. It's described as a cumulative impact analysis, and what that means is their formula that they've determined in order to sort of rank communities across the state by the amount of cumulative burdens that they face are threat, so the different kinds of actual environmental hazards, multiplied by vulnerability. So again, some of those different community characteristics that we were talking about, and that equals the amount of risk. Another attempt to engage in the concept or address cumulative environmental hazards was the HEAL Act, passed in 2021. The entire goal of the HEAL Act is that it intended to reduce environmental harm exposure, especially in disparities, through the preparation of an environmental justice assessment for specific agency actions. It directed agencies to incorporate that kind of analysis in their environmental justice assessments. So specifically looking at, okay, if we were to pursue this route of action, how would that affect a community that's already facing disproportionate levels of environmental burdens? We can advance to the next slide. There's a bit of a difference between the different approaches taken to that disproportionate or cumulative environmental issue that we were talking about. So there's two main kinds of approaches that I think you can break the different kinds of policy-based solutions to. There's the risk-based approach, which asks what the chance or likelihood of harm is of happening and bases an action on what an acceptable level of risk is. Stuff that looks like that are the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, so NAAQS, the management and regulation of PFAS, the setting of environmental limits for chemicals, or Superfund site remediation. So it's setting a bare threshold minimum, basically saying, like, here's where we're going to cut off. At this point is when it's bad. You can get up to that point, but then anything beyond that is bad, because that's the most acceptable risk level that we've determined. The other alternative approach is a disproportionate burden approach, which asks who bears an unfair share of harm and targets what causes those unequal conditions. This is a more recent approach that's been exemplified in a couple different states. So California with the Cal EnviroScreen bill. Chicago has started introducing health impact assessments. And then New Jersey and New York passed environmental justice bills in the past couple of years that really look to say, we're not going to be doing this based on risk, but rather we're saying no more addition of a burden when there's already an existing disproportionate burden. No longer are we going to wait until it hits a certain threshold level. We're just going to prevent from the very beginning. Guillermo, can you fast forward to the next slide, please? Thanks. So put another way, what are the policy objectives of CURB? First, it's to prevent the continued pollution of already overburdened communities with the goal of reducing the current levels of pollution. So that's two parts. It's preventing and then also reducing. Second one is requiring agencies to act in a precautionary manner when making decisions about environmental permitting in already overburdened communities. So just that requirement of precautionary. So as we were talking, not risk-based, but preventative. Third, it's developing a replicable, transparent, and translatable process for analyzing cumulative risk burdens already being faced by a community. We want something that all agencies can use, or any agencies that would be targeted by this policy can use in an easy manner that's easy for both agency and communities to understand why the decisions that are being made the way they are. Okay, we can fast forward. So,
Sorry, Nico, can you explain the picture?
oh, yes. The picture is from our community, or our why am I blanking on the name? We just had a summit, our membership summit. That's the word. Our membership summit in Ellensburg a few months ago, as Guillermo noted in a couple other photos. We hosted a CURB policy workshop during that time, where we had multiple of our different community members and our front and centered members gather together and do a bit of role playing to sort of figure out how the CURB pollution policy would work. And this is a photo during one of those role-playing stakeholdering meetings. So it was a great opportunity for a lot of really impressive different viewpoints to be heard and sort of chatted through. So how would CURB work? It's this is a somewhat simplified image for a somewhat more complex actual process, but at the end of the day, I think this is the easiest way to sort of understand. I like going from a really broad overview into a little bit more detailed as you go along. So the main questions that you have to ask are, is the proposed project, so this targets projects and permits, is the proposed project going to be in a pollution overburdened community? That's something the bill titles as a community that's a 7 or above on the environmental health disparities map, as well as some other supplementary mapping tools out there. The second question is the project seeking a permit that the bill has listed out? And we can get into those kinds of permits later. But if the answer to both of those questions is yes, then the project, or the lead agency in this case, depending on who's issuing the permit, is required to prepare an environmental justice impact statement. So whoever the lead agency is under the State Environmental Protection Act is required to prepare that environmental justice impact statement, which is a detailed report that sort of analyzes what is the current baseline level of environmental harms or environmental burdens in a community, what are the vulnerabilities in a community, and then it also forecasts, if we were to approve this project, what would the effects be on a community, as well as asks, what are some different alternatives? So it's very similar to that HEAL approach, but then it sort of deviates in this third step. But before that, there's also going to be a required community public hearing process with some more opportunities for community members to really voice their opinions about whether this project is necessary, whether this project actually serves a compelling public interest, or whether or not this project would actually increase burden in the community, and really elevates the amount of voice that community members get during that process. So once that EJIS has been prepared, the lead agency then has to make a decision. If the project is for a new project or the expansion of a currently existing project, there are a couple different options or outcomes. If it's found that the project would increase the amount of environmental burdens in that community, then the agency has to deny the permit. They're required to. However, if there's a determination that that project, it would increase the amount of cumulative burden in a community, but there's a compelling public interest, so that sort of necessary feature of a project. So you're thinking something like water treatment, where there's no other possible area that this water could be treated, and it's treating water for a community, that same community that it's located in, then the agency would be required to condition the approval and try and sort of limit the effects. And then finally, if there's no actual increase to the existing levels of environmental burden, then the agency could approve. This changes for the renewal of an existing project, the renewal of a permit for an existing project. In that case, then the agency is incentivized to try and condition approval as appropriate, but otherwise is just going to approve those permits, but try and work with the project to try and limit the amount of effects in a community. We can move to the next one. So what kind of permits are going to be covered by this this bill or this policy? Right now, and this is all subject to change because this is not it still needs to go through the legislative process, but right now, as the bill is written, it would be looking at water pollution control, Clean Air Act permits, solid waste management, municipal sewage or sludge or biosolids, and solid waste incinerators, although it exempts clean energy projects. What that means is that there's a number of different kinds of different projects that would be covered by this bill, and it's pretty wide-ranging across a bunch of different kinds of media. And what I mean by media is water, air, land, or soil, as we talked about. So this is a pretty wide-ranging policy and bill, so it will try and get at a number of different environmental hazards. In terms of the photos, there's some water sewage treatment plants and then smokestacks being shown. I think we can move on. So how do we do the actual analysis of whether or not a community is going to be more or less harmed by a project being approved? At the end of the day, what we're asking agencies to do is to look at a list of environmental and public health stressors. We've provided at least a bare minimum start to it, but we'd hope that agencies, if this bill is to pass, would continue to develop these and start thinking about what kind of stressors they would want to see included, as well as what community members think should be included that we haven't gotten to in our bill. So this is just, this is in other words, a non-exhaustive list. There should always be more being added to this in terms of an analysis. I'm not going to read out every single thing on this stressor list because it's a pretty long list, and I know we have a lot of other topics to get to. But I do want to note the different types of groupings. So that's air pollution, mobile sources of air pollution, water pollution, and then on the next slide, Guillermo, we've also got environmental hazards, and then also social and social determinants of health. So it isn't just the actual hazards, it's also getting back to those different vulnerabilities or characteristics of a community as well. We can go on to the next slide. And I think that's it on CURB.
Thank you, Nico. So I know folks might have some questions on this. Happy to take them. The bill is, again, HB 2070, if you want to take a look at the bill language. And we also have more information on our website, a one-pager, and some easier to understand language. But happy to take questions on this one as you all come up with them. The next policy priority that we'll be touching on is our budget priorities. And that will be led by our colleague, Devin Diaz. So Devin, want to introduce yourself and kick us off?
Thank you, Guillermo. Again, my name is Devin Diaz. I'm the policy coordinator here at Front Centered. On this slide is a list of our budget priorities for the year and includes a picture of our coalition members at the state or Washington State Capitol at the last session as we were advocating for transportation justice. In identifying our budget priorities, we worked with a coalition and identified three key elements. Improving accountability, we work to ensure that frontline or overburdened communities receive at least 40% of the revenue generated through the Climate Commitment Act as required by law. Sustained investments such as community capacity building, as well as participatory budgeting programs need to be maintained and grow over time. And lastly, new significant investments developed and requested by frontline communities. Next slide, please. So on this slide is our analysis of the 2023-2025 budget. It includes a pie chart that breaks down the Climate Commitment Act legislative allocations for the current budget. And in that, we identified 6.7% was explicitly allocated to non-tribal overburdened communities. This means within the language of the budget, it clearly stated a percentage, for example, 40% or 75% going explicitly to overburdened communities. We identified 4% of the funds were prioritized for overburdened communities, meaning in these sections of the budget, it did not clearly identify an amount or percentage, but instead used language like overburdened communities must be prioritized. In those places, we used the minimum required by law of 35% going to overburdened communities. We identified a little over 6% was dedicated to tribal funding. And please note, the state does consider tribes as overburdened communities as well. But for our review, we broke out tribal and non-tribal overburdened community funding streams. And lastly, 6.4% was dedicated to program development for overburdened communities. This includes staffing to administer the environmental justice programs that are intended to benefit frontline communities. Next slide, please. So applying that same analysis structure when the governor's proposed budget was published, we use that same lens. So on this slide, again, you're looking at a pie chart that breaks down the governor's proposed supplemental budget. And in that, we identified 6.4% was dedicated to non-tribal overburdened communities, with 10.5% being prioritized to overburdened communities. 4% of the funds were identified going to tribes and tribal governments, with less than 1% allocated to program development. I want to note that our analysis of the governor's proposal will continue, as well as how the budgets evolve in the legislature, to ensure that the Climate Commitment Act, or the obligations under the Climate Commitment Act and the HEAL Act, are honored, and overburdened frontline communities see at least 40% of the revenue going to them. Next slide, please. So our key findings identified within the 2023-2025 budget, 6.7% going to overburdened communities, and compared to the governor's proposed budget of 16.4%. So it's trending in the right direction, but we still have work to do and ensure that we hold the legislature accountable and frontline communities see the revenue that's promised to them. Total to non-tribal overburdened communities and tribal communities in the current budget, it's at 23.2%. and the governor's proposed budget is at 31.4%. Lastly, the governor's proposed budget does not recommend revisions to the adopted budgets to make climate commitment allocations explicit to overburdened communities, or in places it was unclear. Next slide, please. In reflection and looking at the current budget, there are some budget victories. And those include $26.3 million for the Environmental Health Disparities Map capacity grants, $824,000 for the Ejidos Community Farmland purchase, and $38.6 million for participatory budget grant program. These funds should be sustained and expand over time. Next slide, please. On this slide, what's reflected is our front and centered request submitted to the governor, as well as a breakdown of what items are included in the governor's budget. These items include $3 million for a community assemblies program. Currently, the governor's budget has it funded at $1 million. We requested $300 million for a community land and development fund that may be used for building community resiliency hubs, climate appropriate farming and food production, creating green spaces for people, or to buffer climate impacts such as heat or flooding, housing that reduces vehicle miles traveled and the associated pollution, cultural preservation from climate related displacement, and green job related business uses. The Ejidos Community Land Farm purchase is a good example how we see this fund being used if funded. We also submitted $600,000 for an environmental health violations reporting tool study with a goal of improving the reporting and mitigation systems for environmental health violation reporting, particularly within overburdened communities. And this might include if pesticides are being used in a farming community and those community members want to report the overuse of pesticides impacting the places in which they live, that the state has the proper mechanism to address those issues in a culturally appropriate way. And lastly, there are two Department of Commerce programs we're monitoring, and those are the Clean Energy Community Decarbonization Project at $100 million and the Washington Clean Energy Ambassador Program at $10 million. And with that, I'll pass it to Marielle, our Clean Energy Policy Lead at Front and Center, to talk more about our energy initiatives.
Our energy justice initiatives this year kind of remain based in our overall mission in the energy justice space to support a just transition off of the extractive and kind of high greenhouse gas emitting current features and functions of energy as generated and as served to meet Washington's needs, to a more regenerative and kind of renewable-based energy economy. There are kind of a number of proposed bills. We are looking at tracking and broadly supporting several. And I wanted to kind of speak to that and also just speak to where a little bit more about where money is going or where money could be going. So to start with some notes about what we've seen from the governor's proposed budget and particularly from where the Department of Commerce and the State Energy Office are supporting or kind of providing energy-specific kind of resource allocation recommendations to the legislature. And our kind of key priority, which is that these kind of resources, that these allocations are equitably distributed and are benefiting benefiting Washingtonians in a way that really centers the needs of the highly impacted and overburdened communities who have historically been disproportionately harmed or disproportionately left out of the benefits of new technologies and other features of how the energy system has evolved. speaking to the clean energy communities decarbonization part of the governor's proposal. We're supportive of this. It is about centering communities in planning and accessing funds for projects that are generated by and serving those communities. So it's a project fund that will provide grants and support planning and investment that is more deeply kind of community-based than any other current features of the Clean Energy Fund, or how state agencies and commerce are currently set up to allocate and support kind of funds for clean energy projects. And this, it looks pretty good to us. We will just kind of continue to keep our eye on and kind of recommend that the features of this recommendation specific to who is eligible to access these project funds are well defined and really centered in equity, that there's prioritization for, and in the current kind of description, there are statements around that, and so we want that to continue to be supported and refined in the actual, if and when these monies are ready to be dispersed, that is how it looks, that tribes and vulnerable populations, overburdened communities, highly impacted communities as defined by the environmental health disparities map are prioritized and in fact are the primary beneficiaries of kind of this fund allocation. And then other features of the governor's budget that are kind of supporting community solar, community EV charging infrastructure, solar resiliency hubs, and kind of continuation and expansion of funds provided for heat pumps and kind of resiliency, reducing barriers to grants and ways to make it easier and better for communities to access the resources to get more clean energy, to transition off of kind of fossil fuel based energy sources and like towards more renewable and regenerative sources, but also own that transition so that these are highly localized and held by communities in a way that the current system really isn't, as many of you are familiar with. We are also supporting the idea of the Clean Energy Ambassadors Corps, the Community Energy Ambassadors. There's the $10 million fund allocation from Commerce, or a proposal to dedicate some funds and invest in individuals who will be community-based, led basically by community decision-making processes around how to plan for decarbonization, how to plan for shifting towards cleaner and more kind of just sources and distribution of sources for communities. So seeing those funds actually kind of translate to the individuals who will be based in community, speaking languages that serve the needs of communities who are not primarily English speakers or multilingual and have other characteristics that are and cultural experiences that will benefit from having their members or having those who connect more directly with them, with the knowledge of that culture and of those languages there to be an ambassador for clean energy planning and program design, and also the opportunity to access the benefits of household level project or kind of investments so that they can experience like healthier and safer homes from existing grant funds or programming funds more immediately because they have the support of kind of trusted messengers, because there are many challenges in how a lot of those programs are currently kind of set up around access. And that speaks also to the navigator idea, and including the House Bill 1391, which is a proposal for getting the information, collecting and clarifying all information about kind of clean energy programs that are currently available and accessible to Washington households, and assembling that in a way that just makes it a lot easier for people to know what is available, what they are eligible for, through kind of a website and outreach, and that will, I think, continue to be refined. The bill as filed is moving forward, and I think maybe a substitute will be forthcoming that will really dive into how that will happen, how that will look, and particularly how dedicated significant portions of the resources for that program will be basically be specifically to benefit highly impacted communities and overburdened communities and tribes. So the equity components of how more accessible information and resources around clean energy programming is definitely like our interest in this, and what we would see that being beneficial to broaden access to the benefits of clean energy for communities. There are several decarbonization specific efforts for like what utilities can do, empowering utilities to take steps to wind down their higher emitting and more harmful gas operations, including House Bill 1589, which it's kind of still in development, but well, hopefully, and we will be supportive of the features that really set a standard for how utilities, particularly Puget Sound Energy, the largest utility for that bill, will wind down or not be expanding kind of gas operations if possible, due to redefining what obligations to serve gas look like, as well as kind of line extensions. So instead of extending and expanding natural gas, to make it to move off of that high emitting, harmful climate kind of energy system, and allow more focused investment and intention to cleaner electrification or and other sources. There's additionally a thermal energy network bill that's come up, House Bill 2129. And that is more focused on empowering utilities who are kind of primarily gas utilities to shift from providing natural gas through kind of pipelines and using that infrastructure and the skills in the pipeline worker, like in that workforce space, to shift to thermal energy, which is cleaner, without it having to be as disruptive as a wholesale kind of shift towards electrification, but that would still focus on providing heat, basically space and water heating, with the existing infrastructure and skills and that workforce, which have been a big concern from kind of the gas industry. We have so many people and we have so much infrastructure set up for this. So how do we just stop providing it? Well, this is more about adaptation. Yeah.
Thank you, Marielle. You want to wrap up the energy section? I think we're going to move maybe to question and answer.
Yeah, I think kind of those are most of our focus. So happy to answer any questions later.
Thanks, Marielle. So with that, folks, we're gonna close off here with the call to action, and then go into some of the questions. But you know, with the Cumulative Risk Burden Pollution Act that Nico was covering, that one is a bill that it just got introduced, so it needs a lot of support. So for community members here, for folks that are able to take action, obviously folks that are able to boost what this law is and what it does and its impact on community, we would really appreciate that support. On our website at frontandcenter.org, you can find more information about CURB and folks that have signed onto it. So on the bottom right, we have a photo of just some of the organizations that have signed on to CURB. Obviously, you heard from Duwamish River Community Coalition, Community to Community Development, APIC Yakima, the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, and a lot more are hosted on our website for folks that have endorsed the CURB Act. So our call to action, I'm going to see if I actually have. So here's the website at frontandcenter.org. If you just scroll down a little bit, this is found just in the middle of the page, but you can sign on to support, and it'll take you to our CURB website where you can find out more and sign up your organization to support. And also take action, which our action is going to be contacting your respective legislators. So when you click the action, it'll take you to fill out your name, where you live, and it'll contact your respective House of Representatives member to help us support CURB and get them to urge them to vote yes when the time comes. James, anything I'm missing on the action before I go to question and answer?
No, I think that covers it. Thanks, Guillermo.
Yeah, thanks, James. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing screen here. We did get some questions. I'm going to just cover the logistical questions first for folks. You will get the slides. We got a question from Rosemary and a couple of others, but for folks that did register for the briefing, you will get the slides and you will get a recording of this webinar. So just keep an eye out for that. We have a question from regarding CURB. Would CURB be the first legislation in Washington that creates substantive rules, example, denying permits for EJ considerations? From what I understand, HEAL helped with prioritizing EJ and procedures like SEPA, but it didn't create an enforcing statute like this permitting piece in CURB. So HEAL has, and we'll get you these answers as well in writing, but HEAL has broad reach on agency decisions by working upstream from policy development to budgets. So request legislation, agency budgets. And CURB is more specifically looking at polluting permitting. So they both sit at the intersection of environmental justice, but CURB does have more of that authority behind it. So we'll get you that. Thanks for the question. In terms of what are the sticking points for CURB, we anticipate that polluting industries are probably going to come out against the bill. There is this conception that we can't really grow the economy without having some sort of environmental harm, but we're pushing back against that and saying that our community's health really should be prioritized over trying to balance economic growth on the backs of communities' health is something that we've done for too long. We got a question: can lead agencies get away with not making an environmental impact statement? So just reading off of what one of our staff members wrote, a lead agency would be required to prepare an environmental justice impact statement if the project in question is seeking a permit of the kind covered by the bill, and then 2, located in a pollution burdened community. If those two conditions are met, then they must prepare an environmental justice impact statement. We got a question of when the bills that we're tracking will be made publicly available. We'll have something on our website for folks to track of just all the bills that we are prioritizing. The budget bills are going to be changing. The governor's proposed budget is its own bill. The House and Senate's budget bill will be their own numbers as well. So we'll try to make that easier for folks to process. And then another question about bill numbers. At least the CURB bill is HB 2070. The one that Marielle spoke to was, I believe, Thermal Energy Networks was 2129 by Representative Rammel. And I think the last question that we have is how we plan to educate folks about CURB more and involve them in the pollutants permit evaluation process. So our website is definitely going to be the best place to keep updated on CURB, any events or briefings that we have. If we get a hearing, you can hear about it there too. But again, folks, if you have other questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out and we could try to address them as much as possible. So I think we'll end it there. For folks that we didn't get questions to, we did get some other comments and feedback about getting data and making the table easier to understand regarding tribal funding and non-tribal funding. So we will follow up and get that.
Too.
Yeah, go ahead, Pauline.
Economic costs.
Yeah,
health
economic
impacts.
costs. Yeah. So that's what we're able to cover today with Q&A. Paulina, is there anything you want to close us off with before we send everyone home?
I just want to thank everyone for being here with us, and we encourage you to continue send us those questions. That is only going to help us make it better. And also, if you have any follow-up comments to us, please do reach out to either Guillermo, Derek, or ourselves at the RCC. We want to thank you for giving us, the time today. We really need it as we look forward to successful legislative new session. And we're looking forward to having healthy communities, healthy environments, as we deserve on those who have been impacted the most. And so we're really getting close to it by having the right legislation to protect us. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the afternoon.